Chapter 30, Turn Old Knowledge into New Use. You are listening at novelfull.audio. A second later, the sound came up again. The same 4 words, 4 stars, and 1 position was repeated. Then a new set of words were heard. Su Shu, Shan Wei. Luo Luo held the falling rain whip in her hands and guided the whip to follow the directions. The raindrops and wind all solidified into one straight line. It was as if the line ignored time and accurately pierced into the one point in the sky. The completely dark sky had nothing. Yet when the falling rain whip stabbed in, it brought another streak of blood and a painful cry. Different from the previous painful call, which carried shock and anger, this call expressed more confusion and even some fear. Luo Luo felt that her chi was moving inside her body with tremendous speed, even if it was not flowing through all the vessels that the sword technique required. The chi was still able to arrive at the hand that was holding the whip and reach a point where it was even stronger than when she was practicing it. This made her very confused, but even more so surprised and happy. At the same time, the voice kept coming. Sometimes it gave her instructions about the sword technique of Wind and Rain Sword of Mountain Zhong, sometimes it told her which actions she should make, and sometimes it told her how she should channel her chi, but the instructions were all different from what the sword technique manual said. Most of the things that she heard from was based on the stars in the sky. Hearing the voice made Luo Luo remember a time when she was very little. Her dad was on the edge of the cliff and pointed towards the clouds to teach her fighting techniques. Thinking back made her feel more and more tranquil and calm. She didn't need to think, and she simply had to let her spirit follow her mind. The falling rain whip in her hand flew over like an extremely sharp sword and constantly stabbed into the darkness. Pa 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 pa, sounds. From the darkness came a seemingly infinite amount of blows. The sounds came from the tough and terrifying falling rain whip which had landed on the demon's body. Several dozens of fragmented fabrics could be seen flying in the wind soon after. These black fabrics fell to the ground. Chi 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 chi, more sounds. The first half of the falling rain whip was stained with blood and became red. Blood were also splashing out of the darkness at the same time, but the wounded man was still invisible. It was as if a shapeless pen dipped with red ink was scribbling uncontrollably. The image looked very strange. After another painful but angry yell, the demon elite finally could no longer hide where he was and fell out of the darkness. Immediately after his feet touched the ground, he rolled along the surface a dozen loops. It was only until he was near the lake did he dare to stop. On the demon elite's body, wounds from the falling rain whip could be seen everywhere on his body. He was constantly bleeding, and the robe hanging messily on his body had already become spliced up. He looked extraordinarily miserable. Where could his previous power and influence be seen? The first thought he had after being forced out of the darkness was to retrieve back to it and get away from the falling rain whip. The farther, the better. During the process of moving back with difficulty, he did not forget to take back the magic weapon that he had placed in the lawn at the beginning of the battle because he had lost all his courage and spirit to fight. He squatted next to the lake like a dog. His right hand held onto the magic weapon to protect his head. The sounds coming out of his mouth were like a broken air bellow. It was very hoarse and filled with shock, anger, hatred, and fear because he could not understand why he could not hide from the whip. Who is it? Get out. The demon elite looked at the darkness surrounding the Tradition Academy. Then he looked toward the dark light outside of the library. He remembered that he seemed to have forgotten about something. His bloody face revealed extreme tension and his voice was very shaken. The light on the lawn outside of the library became brighter because the door was opened. Then the surrounding light became a bit darker because someone just walked out. A youngster stood on the staircase. He wore an old Taoist robe and held a little sword. His face was slightly pale and somewhat nervous, but his eyes looked determined and had no intention to flinch. Chen Changsheng was always in the library. For all these nights, he has been in the library. He was absorbing the starlight and purifying himself. The reason he woke up from the meditation mode wasn't because of the raging fight outside of the library, but because the magical weapon used by the demon Xiaoxingst interfered with the starlight that was shining down from the night sky. He had walked to the window and found out a battle was ensuing in the Tradition Academy. He didn't know who the young girl was, but after seeing the demon horns of that man, he knew immediately which side he should stand with. And then, the male demon disappeared into the darkness of night. The long whip in the hand of the young girl summoned the wind and rain into the field. From the beginning he didn't think that he had the ability to help the young girl because he hasn't even reached purification yet. Besides, the young girl and the male demon were seemingly more powerful than him. He stood at the window's corner and observed the fight silently. He was cheering for the young girl, but he didn't make any sound. Chen Chongqing didn't want to bring any negative variable into this fight, so he didn't want his presence to distract the young girl. The demon probably wouldn't care about a regular human's life, but that young girl might. He didn't miss this detail because he was a careful and observant person. But a moment later, he discovered surprisingly that he might actually be able to change this fight. The whip in the young girl's hand was no ordinary weapon, but she wasn't using the techniques of a whip but rather a sword. The wind and rain sword of Mountain Zhong. In the old temple of Xining village, Chen Chongqing saw this sword technique and he remembered very clearly that it was written down in the 4th chapter of Yuhua Scroll. Of course, the sword techniques were written in the ways of Taoist debates. Just a few days ago, he found the corresponding books in the library and realized that the techniques were hidden in those mysterious and difficult words. He memorized the entire sword technique, and after the recent reviews, it was only natural for him to see the young girl's sword technique that was hidden with her whip. But her attacks only contained the form of the technique but not the actual core. In addition, her way of using qi was weird, or the battle wouldn't have been this difficult. Yes, although he didn't have a trace of qi in his body, he had already started studying about ways to use qi. After countless days of studying in the library and comparing the information with the knowledge in his head, he tried to break the limit of his veins to use qi. For this purpose, he has already made several assumptions. Since his 9 veins weren't connected, if he wants to Xiao Xing he must find an entirely new way. He didn't know if this way was useful or if it could use the wind and rain sword of Mountain Zhong. He was just an ordinary person without qi, but at that time the young girl was heavily wounded and was about to die. He must take a step forward and gamble on this idea because he wanted to help her. BVEC it was just a single sentence. Absorb the starlight into the chest and let the qi flow freely. Lift your wrist to the shoulder and hold back the wind and rain. Luckily, the problem of the young girl's qi when using wind and rain sword of Mountain Zhong was very similar to his problem. But more luckily, the girl listened to his advice without knowing his identity. But the luckiest thing was that Chen Chongqing's assumptions were successful and worked on the young girl. The wind and rain sword of Mountain Zhong finally showed its true power. But how did you know where I was? Next to the lake, the bloody demon man stared and furiously yelled at Chen Chongqing. The falling rain whip was powerful, especially after the little girl applied Chen Chongqing's teachings. If she could use qi to use the sword of rain and wind of Mountain Zhong, then as long as she knew the location of the demon elite, she could definitely wound him heavily. The problem was, how could Chen Chongqing know his location so soon? New moon snow, plum blossom steps, approximately 3,000 positions, all of these needs to be memorized. Chen Chongqing walked to the little girl, placed the little sword horizontally in front of his chest, and looked at the demon elite far away. He was very cautious, but he spoke very casually. I did not know that this is the Yi Shi move, but I had memorized it before. Yes, this was the most mysterious movement in demon race, the Yi Shi move. Relying on this movement technique, people could move freely in a certain range, and most importantly they could hide their tracks using the technique. Even inside the demon race, such movement technique was a secret that common people wouldn't know. But since Chen Chongqing was very young, he already memorized all of the 3,000 or more positions and the order in between. Back then, he thought he was reading a propaganda-type book named Index of Mist. Until 8 days ago, in the library he read a documentation on a real battle between a senior from the tradition and a demon elite. After the comparison, he realized that this book was actually about a Xiao Xing technique. Therefore you are lying. You are not one of the Mohe clan, your last name is not Mohe. Chen Changsheng looked at the male demon and said seriously. You are one of the Yishe clan, your last name is Yishe. The demon Xiao Xingist was deeply surprised. He had a grave expression. There was more things that he didn't expect. He thought the youngster in the library wouldn't affect tonight's plan because that youngster didn't even reach the purification stage yet. What he didn't realize was that this youngster almost destroyed the plan that was set down by Sir Black Robe. What he never thought of was that the youngster was more interested in the small lie he told in the beginning. This made him melancholic and irritated. And then he was sad. He whispered to himself, the advisor truly has unlimited wisdom. He knew that I didn't want to die and wished to use the legendary weapon to protect myself. Therefore, he planned the appearance of this strange youngster. Editor Bingo. I am weak. That last comment. Editor. You are not weak, Chen Changsheng is. Chapter 31, When the Sky Was Falling Down, he was at her side. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chen Changsheng did not really understand what he meant. He moved a bit closer to the little girl, trying his best to shield her. The demon race man kept a sad face and continued speaking, because you showed up, I cannot kill her. My only option is to use the legendary weapon. I will die with you, but this is the advisor's spirit. No one can stop it. Chen Changsheng faintly felt worried. His hand held his sword tighter. The demon man stood up, looked at Chen Changsheng and sighed. Young man, I don't know who you are, but I think in the future you will definitely become a great person. It is unfortunate that tonight you will die with me. After saying this, he raised an iron magic weapon. Along with his action, an extremely terrifying power fell from the sky. Countless tiny iron pieces flew back from the darkness. The shapeless barrier that separated the world disappeared. A mountain-like black net that was extremely large fell down upon the Tradition Academy. Net of fog. Luo mumbled with a noticeably paler face. Ranked 19th in tier of legendary weapons. Net of fog. The legendary weapon of the demon race. According to legend, it was the first demon emperor's net for hunting. Once it fell, the entire world would be covered. Nothing could break it. Even famous legendary swords could not break it. Normally such a strong demon race magic weapon should rank even higher on the tier of legendary weapons, at least not lower than the Falling Rain Whip, but because it was the Fate Cabinet from the human world that created this tier, they ranked it lower than it should be because of bias. It was also because the weapon had been severely damaged. It was said that in the ancient past, the real name of the net of fog was Fog of Hell. It was recreated by an elite who had unimaginable power, but it was never restored to its original strength. Its name was then changed to Net of Fog. If it were the Fog of Hell, upon spreading out, it could effortlessly turn the person under the net into emptiness. The current severely wounded Net of Fog could separate the world, but if it is used as an attack, then it requires the user to offer her life as a consecration. This was why the demon male did not use this magic weapon to attack since the very beginning. Before Chen Changsheng gave Luo guidance and had severely injured him, the demon had the chance to kill Luo. Now, it was not possible, and the only way to accomplish the mission was to use his life in exchange for Luo's life. Because he had to die, he was obviously somewhat sad. Looking at the big black net that was falling down from the sky, Luo was shocked. Her face was pale because she knew what this net was and understood that even though the net of fog no longer had its terrifying power in the ancient time, it still couldn't be shielded by ordinary people. Her Falling Rain Whip couldn't defend against it. Perhaps the frozen spear could break through the net, but this legendary spear was in the royal palace. Who could help her? She raised her head and looked towards the black net in the night sky. Her falling rain whip lashed out like lightning and brought wind and rain along with it. A deep noise was heard. The falling rain whip was like a snake struck by lightning and broke into millions of pieces. The whip was retracted reluctantly. An unthinkable amount of strength was sent into her small body through the whip. She spit blood from her mouth and fell onto her back. The terrible fight tonight was extremely exhausting for a 14-year-old girl. She couldn't hold her ground anymore and her eyes were blurry. Right before she fainted, the last scene she saw was that the youngster took out his short sword and thrusted it into the dark night sky. That sword was dim, it was normal, and it was short. The youngster's arm raised high into the sky. It welcomed the attack of the black giant net. His movement was a little slow. It gave a feeling of sadness to the audience. Since the difference between them was so great, it was like he didn't know his limit. It felt hopeless. It was like a mantis trying to stop a running horse or an egg falling down into the dew platform and crashing against the hard surface. Luo Luo was sad. She was sorry. If it wasn't for her, he probably wouldn't have died. Then, she fainted, a loud clash. The seemingly indestructible giant black net was torn in the middle. The wind that was blocked outside of the barrier blew violently into the center of the net. Following the wind was the real starlight, it poured down like a waterfall into the barrier. A burning cloud appeared in the vast sky and suddenly the cloud descended into the middle of the Tradition Academy. The grass on the field was burnt and the leaves on the trees were dried up. The temperature of the field kept on rising. It was a red cloud Kirin. The red cloud Kirin crashed heavily into the chest of the demon Xiaxingist and the chest bones of that demon were broken into pieces. He started to spit blood involuntarily. His body slammed heavily into the grass field but his right hand was still holding onto the magical weapon tightly. Another clashing sound. A burning knife brightened the night sky of the Tradition Academy. The right arm of the demon Xiuxing was chopped off and it flew into the sky before finally landing into the lake. A middle-aged man was sitting on the back of the red cloud Kirin. He was fully armed and his armor was also blood red. His expression was deadly and serious while looking down onto the demon. The demon Xiuxingist's face was filled with hopelessness. He whispered, "It's you, no wonder you could break through the net of fog. Xue Xingchuan. The general of Zhou. He rides a red cloud Kirin as a mount and held the bloody butcher as his weapon. He was trusted deeply by the divine queen and he controlled the capital army of Zhou for many years. Out of the 38 generals of the continent, he was ranked second. Yi Shirtan Lu. Of course you are hiding in the capital." Xue Xingchuan looked at the person covered in blood underneath his mount and said expressionlessly. "Of course, you are not worth my time. But I really want to know if you are able to keep silent about Black Robe after being sent to the Department of Investigation." The male demon's name was actually Yi Shirtan Lu. He was already in a corner, but he fell into an abyss after hearing the words of Xue Xingchuan. The demon knew the humans wanted to use him as a source to find the advisor. After noticing that he couldn't even commit suicide, all desire to live was gone. What is true power? Xue Xingchuan held true power. Even if you want to die, you couldn't die in front of him. Countless presents shone up in the Tradition Academy. Faintly, several flying mounts could be spotted approaching in the night sky. This battle occurred close to the royal palace. After the net of fog was deactivated, it alarmed countless people. The top-ranked Xiaxingsts like Xue Xingchuan arrived first. Then the rest of the guards and Xiuxingists came. Many people flipped over the stone wall at night and appeared in the field. Those people that saw the scene were shocked. They didn't care about the male demon that was held down by Xue Xingchuan and ran straight to Luo Luo. They brought her away quickly. Xue Xingchuan knew the identity of these people and didn't stop them. He was satisfied because he captured one of the Yi Shi clan, who were experts in hiding. Furthermore, he may be able to find out more about the mysterious demon advisor from this male demon. The only thing that bothered him was the sentence Yi Shi Tan Lu whispered before he went into a coma. Xue Xing Chuan wrinkled his eyebrows slightly. He knew clearly that when he arrived the net of fog had already been destroyed. The guards locked down the male demon and dragged him away. The only thing waiting for him at night was his terrible fate. The Red Cloud Kirin turned around slowly. Xue Xing Chuan looked at the youngster not too far away from him and asked expressionlessly, "And who are you?" Chen Changsheng, who still held that short sword, was a bit confused of what was going on. After hearing the general's question, he came back to reality. He put the short sword back into the sheath. "I am a student here." Xue Xing Chuan was a little surprised. He didn't know that this unnoticeable youngster was the rumored new student of the Tradition Academy. Just one look he knew that this youngster was an ordinary person, that short sword was common as well. He was probably dragged into this battle by accident. But this youngster was willing to take his short sword and stand in front of that demon. Xue Xing Chuan appreciated his bravery, but it was just a simple appreciation. No one wanted to have any connection with the Tradition Academy. This was a cursed place and he didn't want anything to do with it. Someone went up to Chen Changsheng to check his identity. The Red Cloud Kirin leaped into the sky and flew away with the clouds. Not too long after it disappeared into the royal palace. Chen Changsheng was holding the name list and explaining to the person. He raised his head and looked at this scene for a moment. The next morning Luo Luo woke up very early. Her body was different from normal people and last night she only exhausted her strength. She wasn't heavily wounded. Her mind had already fully recovered. But she didn't get off the bed immediately. She opened her wide eyes and looked at the fancy decoration on her bed. She thought about the events that happened last night, especially the last scene she saw right before she blacked out. Luo Luo's mind was a little stunned. When that black giant nest came down on her, it was like the sky had fell. When she thought she would die the next moment, she saw the youngster stand in front of her and used the short sword to defend her. Her father always used to say, when the sky falls down there would be people taller than you to lift it. She wasn't happy about this because she thought her father was mocking her height. But right now she felt lucky that she was petite. Although the youngster wasn't that tall, he was taller than her. Therefore when the sky fell down, he lifted it for her. Luo Luo didn't know why, but she was happy. She smiled with a satisfaction. Then she realized something and got up quickly. She yelled, "Where is everyone?" 10 or more so of her people came right in like the wind. She asked nervously, "Is he okay?" People who were able to serve her personally, regardless of gender, were smart people. After hearing this, they knew immediately who she was asking for. A person went up and reported, "General Xue Xing Chuan arrived on time. The youngster wasn't wounded." Luo Luo patted on her chest. She was a little scared. "That's good." She flipped over and got off her bed. "I'm going to see him." Her people looked at each other, they all kneeled down at the same time. Some people were even crying a little. Luo Luo realized what she has done and became embarrassed. "I'm sorry, but I won't do anything that I have done last night." Her people let out a sigh of relief. Was their little princess finally growing up? "But I really need to go see him." Luo Luo looked at her people and said sincerely, "He is an important person to me." After hearing this, silence filled the entire room. Thinking back to last night where their princess left the herb garden and got caught in the ambush of the demon, was she trying to meet that youngster in the middle of the night? Her people were terrified. Was their little princess finally growing up? Editor Bing. Yeah, definitely a lover. I bet you guys $0.0000001 that it is a potential lover. Chapter 32, Master, please accept me. You are listening at novelfull.audio. I knew that yesterday I did not behave properly, so I will apologize again, but he is really important to me. So please don't stop me or attempt to stop me. Of course, I promise I won't leave your sight. After saying this, Luo Luo walked outside. On the way, maids came and delivered a towel and a basin for her to wash face and brush her teeth. As she walked, she told her clansmen behind her, even if you want to follow, don't get too close. If you reveal my identity and scare him away, it won't be good. Behind her, a middle-aged man and a pretty woman looked at each other. Their faces became pale after seeing the officials sent by the emperor to serve the princess. Based on what the little princess had just said, it was obvious that this was like one of those folktales where a rich princess falls in love with a poor young student. Naturally, they felt uncomfortable with this new change. Official Jean, what should we do? The pretty woman whispered. The middle-aged man called Official Jean was very mad. Even you women who get to serve her closely don't know what happened. How should I know? Officially, if something happened, you have to take the full responsibility. Luo Luo, under her people's escort, left the herb garden through the side door. She took the things that she ordered her followers to prepare previously, got on a seemingly common wagon, waved her small hand to them, and rode the wagon herself to the direction of 100 Blossom Street. As for the elites, they had already gotten there. The little girl's action was truly vigorous and resolute. Officially looked at the gradually disappearing wagon, used her sleeve to slowly wipe out the tear in her eyes. She felt somewhat worried but also somewhat gratified. She said to Official Jean at her side, since little princess is starting to falling in love, we must let the emperor and the queen know as soon as possible. Official Jin's face looked even worse, said, let emperor know a princess is falling in love with a human. You think we can do it and make it out alive? Official Li said, don't forget, emperor also married a human female. Official Jean said angrily, marry in and marry out, are they the same thing? Official Li sneered, if you dare, tell this to our queen. Official Jean heard it, his mouth felt stuck, and so was his heart. Herb Garden and the Tradition Academy was only an old wall away. Even if she had to go through the 100 Blossom Street, the distance still wasn't that great. The wagon did not go so far. It entered through the school's old door that was decorated with the green ivies and came into the school that was still deserted but already showing some signs of revitalization. The Tradition Academy was completely silent. In the dense forest, there were birds singing in a little building with entablatures sticking out was reflecting the sunlight, like a colored glaze. Thinking about the seemingly sudden attempt at assassination that was planned for years secretly by the demons, she suddenly felt somewhat cold. The Tradition Academy was extraordinarily quiet, as if there was no one, but actually many elites were hiding in there. Some were her clansmen and some were from the royal palace. She was certain that she was safe and so, she gradually eased into her situation. The door of the library was still tightly closed, but the copper locker was not locked. She knew that there was a person inside. She took a deep breath, felt somewhat nervous and walked towards the library. Chen Changsheng was holding a book and reading. But he was actually, in a rare instance, not paying attention to the book. He was thinking about what had happened last night. His left hand was lightly touching the sheath of the sword as he silently recalled the images. He hoped that they wouldn't influence his learning in the Tradition Academy. A demon elite actually lurked for so long in the capital. He thought there should be someone taking responsibility for it. The little girl that was attacked by the demon definitely had a special identity. Was she fine now? When he was thinking about these things, he heard someone knocking the library's door. He stood up, went to the door and opened up the heavy wooden door. When he saw the little girl, he started to worry. The little girl looked very little, her eyes were bright and very big. Her eyelashes were very long, her lips were very red and very beautiful. She looked very cute when she opened her eyes wide and blinked with her eyelashes. He had never talked to such a cute little girl, so for a moment, he was dazed. Luo Luo was opening her big eyes widely and was blinking her eyelashes. Seeing the youngsters looking dazed like a dumb goose made her feel a little embarrassed and a little proud. She thought that what her queen taught her was becoming useful. Hi. Chen Changsheng eventually woke up and took a step back. Luo Luo said, "Hi." Chen Changsheng said seriously, "Excuse me, what are you here for?" Luo Luo felt a little surprised, thinking that they had just met last night and so many things had occurred. Shouldn't he know what I was here for? For no reason, seeing Chen Changsheng's serious look made her involuntarily become serious. She gave a serious salute and said, "Thank you for saving me last night." Little girl's serious salute was a little awkward because she rarely needed to salute to anyone, especially after leaving her homeland and coming to the capital, yet like the old saying goes, serious awkwardness plus a pretty face made for an absolutely cute look. She looked truly cute right now. Chen Changsheng was not good at interacting with females, so his returning salute was also somewhat awkward. He responded, no problem, this is what I should do." This was a very common formality, but Luo Luo did not want to have such a formal and polite communication with him, so she straightened her body, her dark black eyes turned into circle, and she asked, "Why is it something you should do?" Chen Changsheng felt a bit surprised, thought for a moment and then explained seriously, "Because you are younger than me and he's a demon. We both are humans, so I should obviously protect you." Luo Luo heard the phrase, "we both are humans," and smiled. She noticed a detail in this sentence. He said protect instead of save. But after all, you saved me. She looked at Chen Changsheng and said, "What should I give you in return?" Chen Changsheng said seriously, "You came here specifically to express your thanks. This is good enough for me." Luo Luo thought for a while, smiled, turned around and walked to the outside of the library. Her turn was absolutely resolute. She left determinedly. Chen Changsheng looked at the little girl's small shadow and had a mixed feeling. When I say it was enough, then it's enough. When I say leave, they leave right away. The capital's people were truly carefree. Yet right after he sat back on the floor, ready to continue reading, the little girl came back again. She took out lots of things from the wagon. One by one, she put them in front of Chen Changsheng. The first item was a legendary luminous pearl. This legendary luminous pearl was extremely big. Even though it was not as big as a wash basin, it was definitely as big as a bowl. It's also very round, extremely smooth, and had no flaws. Chen Changsheng looked at the rolling legendary luminous pearl and felt dazed. He had never even seen a legendary luminous pearl, but he knew the thing that looked like a glazed ball was a legendary luminous pearl, not because he had read related records and descriptions, but because whenever Luo Luo took out an item, she would always do a serious and detailed explanation of it using her childish voice. Luo Luo was very generous, but she would never cast pearls before swines. This is the principal sword technique of Mountain Li. As long as you are a sword user, you need to learn the sword techniques in this book, including the sect of longevity or mountain virgin. These South barbarians are very cheap and were unwilling to share it with others. It took a lot of effort for my family to obtain it. She delivered an old scroll to Chen Changsheng. She didn't forget to add that, this is the true piece. The scroll in the Mountain Li sword class is actually a copy people made later. Chen Changsheng felt dazed. Looking at the scroll in his hand, he felt like he was having a dream. Was he really holding the principal sword technique of Mountain Li? But there was no news of the principal sword technique of Mountain Li getting stolen at all in the entire continent. Or, was this robbed by this little girl's family? This little girl. Who was she? Pa, a sound. Luo Luo placed a heavy box in front of Chen Changsheng. Dirt was shaking out of the gaps onto the floor. The box was opened and inside was filled with golden leaves, but that wasn't all. She swept the golden leaves away as they were just ordinary fallen leaves to reveal the actual thing below. There lied half a box full of extremely rare crystals. "Oh right, I live in the herb garden next to you." Luo Luo, like magic, took out a bamboo basket and said. I don't really know what you need, so I will let you casually take some from each type of them. Chen Changsheng was already dumbfounded by the legendary luminous pearl, the scroll of sword technique, and the half-box of crystals, but seeing the rare herbs and fruits randomly stacked like regular vegetables, he was shocked again. He had become completely speechless. Luo Luo looked at her curiously thinking, were these not enough? She thought a bit and her little hand was on her left chest. She used a little bit of strength to pull out a button. Last night, she had already pulled 3. After this button got pulled out, the clothes on her left chest fell down revealing her white neck. Chen Changsheng was awakened by the white neck and immediately turned his head. He asked surprisingly, "What do you want to do?" Luo Luo delivered the button made from rhinoceros horn to him and said, I also want to give this to you." "What is this?" "Button of 1,000 miles, have you ever heard it?" Chen Changsheng took the button thinking about the descriptions on this fantastic magic weapon in the scrolls of Wei. He felt very surprised. He raised the button and took a closer look at it facing the sun. After a while, he woke up and immediately put this button onto the little girl's hand. No gains without pains. He looked at the little girl and said seriously. The saving last night was mainly the general who came and saved the 2 of us. I really did not do anything. Even if I did help out with the little I could do, I previously said that it was already enough for you to come specifically to thank me. How can I accept such lavish gifts? You misunderstood. These were not to thank you for saving my life. Luo Luo pointed on the things on the floor and said, "These are for an apprenticeship." Chen Changsheng did not understand. "What? I want to be your apprentice." Luo Luo looked into his eyes. She was very determined. "Master, I want you to be my master. I want to follow you and Xiao Xing." The library was completely silent. There was clean wind blowing from outside of the window. The legendary luminous pearl was slowly rolling on the black floor. The pages on the old sword technique of Mountain Li were slowly flipping, showing several dozens of images of men holding swords. The herbs in the bamboo basket were emitting out light fragrance. Chen Changsheng took a very long pause before eventually realizing what had just happened. He looked at the little girl and confusingly asked, "Why? The night 6 days before, was it you sir who lit up the destined star?" Chen Changsheng thought a bit and said, "Yes. But, you see, I just lit up my destined star and I did not even successfully purify myself. Last night, I saw the battle between you and the demon. You are much stronger than me. How can I be your teacher?" Luo Luo said, "Last night, the only reason why I could injure the demon was all because of your teaching." Chen Changsheng said, "First, can you not call me master?" Luo Luo smiled sweetly, "Okay, master." Chen Changsheng very helplessly put up his hands and explained, "That's only a coincidence." Luo Luo was still smiling, "But master, you know the wind and rain sword of Mountain Zhong, you know the Yi Shi move. These are not just coincidences." Chen Changsheng thought a while. "I just read a little more books than others." Luo Luo opened her big eyes widely and said seriously. "Then how about the way the qi flowed? I knew the sword technique of the wind and rain sword of Mountain Zhong long time ago, but I couldn't figure out how to use qi to control the sword. The professors in the Heavenly Academy and Start Acre Academy didn't even know how to solve the problem, but master. You taught me the solution in 1 sentence. Chen Changsheng remained silent. He really wanted to explain these were just coincidences. It was just his conjecture regarding how to use qi when the vessels were hindered. Last night, the situation was dangerous and he was forced to try it. It was unexpected that this little girl actually succeeded. The success last night did not mean he would always succeed. He also could not explain the issue regarding his own body to the little girl. Of course, more importantly, he couldn't really accept this little girl as his student. Even though the legendary luminous pearl was very pretty, the sword technique was very luring, and those herbs were truly good. He stood up and got ready to leave the library, but he realized that he couldn't move because his leg was being held down by someone. Luo Luo sat on the floor. Her body slightly leaned forward and her two hands tightly hung onto his leg. She looked like an unwilling poor girl abandoned by an ungrateful man. Her heart was actually filled with happiness. She thought silently. Yes, this is the smell that I smelled before. Pervert, perverted lowly girl. Okay, I imagine her as a lowly, maybe not a lowly, but still. That smelling. Master, please accept me. She looked up, opened up her big watery eyes, looked at Chen Chongsheng, said pathetically, whatever you want, I will give you all. Editor Bingo. So do you guys know the background of Lu Lu yet? Chapter 33, Apprentice, Part 1, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Between the Tradition Academy and the Herb Garden, there was an old wall that was covered with green ivy and dominated by moss. Official Jean and Official Li leaned on the wall and eavesdropped on the conversation inside the library. Because the two were experts in Xiu Xing and the little princess didn't hit anything, they heard the conversation and understood the situation. After they saw the action the princess made, suddenly they fell off the wall. It was a pretty bad fall. From the library, sounds of heavy objects falling could be heard from far away, but it didn't affect the library. Inside the silent library, on the dark black floor there seemed to have a motionless picture. The picture depicted Luo Luo tightly hanging onto Chen Chongsheng's leg, who was acting like a sculpture not daring to move at all. Let go of your hand first. Chen Chongsheng felt very nervous, to the point that even his sound got somewhat shaken. Although this little girl just seemed to be a little older than 10, she was still a girl. Having his leg get hanged on tightly by a pair of small hands was extremely embarrassing. He didn't dare to move but only unstoppably yelled out. If I let go my hand, Master will run away. Luo Luo said seriously. Chen Chongsheng felt helpless. He immediately promised, don't worry, I absolutely won't run away. Now can you let go your hands? After you let go then we can talk. Luo Luo appeared very yielding. She trusted what he said and released her hands. Then she pointed to the floor and indicated him to sit down. Chen Chongsheng thought about this little girl's previous swift movement and knew that he had no way of running away from her hands, so he silently sighed and sat down. Seeing that he did not attempt to escape as expected, Luo Luo felt very happy. The library was completely silent. Chen Chongsheng did not know what to say and felt very embarrassing, but obviously Luo Luo did not feel so. She sat in front of him using her hands to support her lower jaw. She looked at him attentively with a smile. The two were very close. Chen Chongsheng could see his own face from her bright black pupils and could see the happiness from her heart. That's a type of extremely pure happiness. Looking at her, Chen Chongsheng got influenced and also felt the happiness come out from the deepest part of his heart. There were no reason for this, but he felt it. But he could not just agree with her request because of happiness and because looking at every perspective this was an unreasonable request. He said seriously, I am really just a common person. I said before too, I just chose my destined star. I did not even purify successfully. You are stronger than me, how could I be your teacher? Luo Luo still used her hand to support her lower jaw and looked attentively at him as if she thought he looked very pretty. No matter how long she looked, it was not enough. Master, if you were just a common person, how could you do those things? Also, you are a good person. Chen Chongsheng did not understand why being a good person was related to him not stronger than her and not successfully purified yet, and asked confusedly, and then? Yesterday before I fainted, I saw Master holding a sword trying to protect me from the falling sky, so Master is a good person. Luo Luo's smile suddenly had an additional different meaning. But actually that's not the last image I saw. The last image I saw were stars filling up the sky. They were really stars, and at that time Yu Tian General Xue Xing Chuan didn't arrive yet. Chen Chongqing realized that she saw it and felt somewhat hopeless. So what? Master, if your sword can break through net of fog, then obviously it's not a common sword. And you, obviously, are not a common person. Luo Luo's eyes looked down and fell upon the seemingly common little sword tied to his waist. Chen Chongqing looked outside and surprisingly said, "Ah." Luo Luo followed his eyes out and felt somewhat confused. She thought, what happened? It's kind of late. Chen Chongqing pointed outside and said, I have to go eating first. Can we talk about it later? Luo Luo's face slightly plumped up like a bun, and it was very cute, but it was also like a little tiger which was still cute. She was about to hang on to him, but Chen Chongqing's voice slightly changed and said, Don't hang on to me. Although the time they spent together was very short, Luo Luo already grasped his personality. She understood that if she pushed him too hard, it would not be a good thing. Because of this, she took back her hands unwillingly and looked at Chen Chongqing, who already silently walked to the exit of the library. She said, Master, just accept me please. On the floor, her skirt hem spread out like a flower. She sat in the center of the flower looking pathetic but very cute. How would Chen Chongqing dare to look back? If he did, he would definitely soften his heart. As he walked out, he waved his hand and ran away. In the 100 Blossom Street he ate a bowl of mixed rice with pickled veggies. Then he walked a while in the capital, thinking that the strange little girl should have already left. Chen Chongqing then returned to the Tradition Academy. After he walked into the library and took a glimpse, he finally relaxed because no one was there as he expected. As the evening was about to arrive, thinking that he already wasted so much time today, he used his fastest speed to finish preparing. He began to calm down and meditate and got ready to absorb starlights to purify again. But before he even closed up his eyes, he saw that under the starlights a skirt was swaying. The little girl walked in. Chen Chongqing said helplessly. I already said. It's impossible. Luo Luo, as if she did not hear what he said, Master, I already move all the things into your bedroom. Among those little buildings only one of them had a stove. That room should be yours. Those herbs were placed in the attic. Everything else was under your bed. Chen Chongqing already noticed, the legendary luminous pearl and the sword technique already disappeared. He originally thought that the little girl took back the things. Who would expect she actually helped him put the things inside the building? He did not even know how to react at all. I want to show Xing. He felt very helpless, but really did not want to waste any more time and miss the night to absorb starlights and purify. So he could pretend as the little girl was non-existent and tightly closed his eyes. Suddenly, he smelled a very light fragrance coming from his right side. He was a bit surprised and opened up his eyes. He saw that the little girl was already at his side. Her little face was only about an inch away from him. If she got even closer, her face would be touching his. He asked helplessly, What do you want? Luo Luo's eyes suddenly lit up. Master, I want you to be my teacher. Chen Chongqing did not know what to say. He gave up, closed his eyes, and began meditating. He was truly someone who was with boring scrolls since youth. Even under a little girl staring at such close distance, he still could actually meditate. The day gradually became lighter and chicken crowing among the families could be heard coming into the Tradition Academy. Chen Chongqing opened his eyes and slowly woke up. He suddenly felt his right shoulder was somewhat heavy and somewhat stiff. He looked back, got scared, and then sighed. The little girl was hanging onto his arm, was leaning her head onto his shoulder. It looked like she was having a sweet dream, and it seemed like she had slept here last night. Chen Chongqing lightly woke her up and said, Go home. No, Luo Luo rubbed her eyes and said aggrievedly. Chen Chongqing sighed and said, Why do you have to do this? Yesterday when Master was absorbing starlight and purifying, I hung on to Master and smelled for a really long time that I am sure, that smell is from you. The smell is really good. I feel really comfortable next to you. It was as if I ate a longevity fruit. Luo Luo remembered last night and her eyes became even brighter like the Tai by star that even morning light could not cover. Then she laughed embarrassedly and continued, I never eat a longevity fruit, but I heard it from my mom. Chen Changsheng was wordless again. Thinking that just because smell was good, she wanted to be his student. Just so she could smell him every day. My Xiu Xing encountered a very troublesome obstacle. No one can solve it, not even the professors at the Heavenly Academy and Startaker Academy could solve it. But Master in order to use Wind and Rain Sword of Mountain Zhong, I can only use what you said that night. This is the evidence. The method of operating Qi to use the Wind and Rain Sword of Mountain Zhong was related to the secret in Chen Changsheng's body. Of course, this was not the main reason he rejected this little girl. I have no right to teach you. Also I have no time to teach you. I want to read, I want to show Xing, and I have a lot of important things to do. Luo Luo saw him for a whole day and obviously knew he cared a lot about time, even to an extreme extent. She asked, Master, why are you so anxious? Yes, such care to time that it even appeared somewhat anxious. Chen Changsheng saw the sincere concern from the little girl's eyes and suddenly felt a bit warm. He always appeared to be very calm because very little people could see the anxiety hiding under his calm appearance. For no reason, he suddenly wanted to talk. I want to participate in the great trial. Also that I must get first place. He looked at her and said seriously. That morning in the library was the most peaceful time. There were no chirping of cicadas and sparrows. Even Frog was sleeping. After a very long time, there was no sneering nor surprising questions. Even after Tang 36 heard Chen Changsheng's goal, he would have some emotional change. Yet Luo Luo's face had no change. She looked seriously at Chen Changsheng and waited for his next words. Chen Changsheng asked, don't you think this goal is very funny? At least somewhat surprising. Funny. Surprising. Why? Luo Luo, who heard this question, on the contrary, felt puzzled. Master participates in the great trial, of course will get first place. The library becomes quiet again, from far away there was faintly a twitter, yet the place became even more quiet. Chen Changsheng was dazed. Her tone made him feel that if he did not get the first place in the great trial, then that would be a strange thing. Bvec he never ate the legendary longevity fruit, but he thought that even if he ate several hundreds of longevity fruits, it would not make him feel as comfortable as hearing this sentence. But, why does Master must participate in the great trial? Luo Luo did not know how much console her reaction gave Chen Changsheng and asked curiously, do you want to see the mausoleum of the books? I can take Master there. Chen Changsheng did not notice the last part of her sentence. He stood up, walked to the window. He looked at the royal palace not far from here and looked at the direction of the Ling Yan Pavilion. The top 3 tiers of the great trial could go to the mausoleum of the books to feel the way, this was what he wanted. Yet only the first place on the great trial would get the chance to meditate for a night in the Ling Yan Pavilion. This was what he wanted the most. Chapter 34, Apprentice, Part 2, You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Ever since he was picked up by his master next to the lake, the phrase Chen Changsheng heard most was, you have a very unfortunate life. Especially the night when was 10, after his body began to emit a strange fragrance, these words were like reminders. They always stayed in his heart. If he wanted to change his unfortunate life, there were only 2 methods. One way was to show Xing up to the deify stage. At this stage, he obviously wouldn't be regulated by destiny. But the deify stage only existed in legends, even Du Fu, who was unbeatable in the past probably did not get to that stage. The second method obviously was to fight against his fate. His master told him that it was rumored that from the beginning of Zhou dynasty, only 3 people were able to fight against the heaven and change their fate. These three people were unmatchable geniuses and they held the power of the world. Chen Changsheng was just a regular person, how could he accomplish this? It didn't matter if he was able to do it or not, it was something he had to do. Therefore he had to compete in the great trial and obtain the championship. Only if he did this would he have a chance at entering the Ling Yen Pavilion, which had strict entry requirements. Only if he entered the Ling Yen Pavilion would he be able to look at the people in the paintings and discover what they had left him. The Ling Yen Pavilion had 24 paintings of the most important officials of the beginning of the Zhou dynasty. New paintings of important officials are constantly added. Nevertheless, the most important ones were still the first 24 paintings. In those 24 paintings, there was hidden evidence and a trace of the second successful fate change of the Zhou dynasty. Chen Changsheng woke up from his deep thought and his eyes glanced from the royal palace to the young girl sitting on the floor. He really liked this child, but he couldn't accept her as his apprentice. This young girl lived in the herb garden and was ambushed by a demon the night before. Her background was unordinary. The greatest possibility was that she was part of the royal bloodline that was exiled by the divine queen and was escorted back in private. He could not have a relationship with such a character. Plus he didn't want to misguide the girl. I need to clean up and rest. Go back home and don't come back anymore. Chen Changsheng said. He wanted to sound harsh and cold so that the young girl would back off. Without waiting for her response, he left the library. He hoped that she would leave knowing the difficult. Chen Changsheng returned to the library at night and saw that the girl wasn't there. He could finally relax. He continued to absorb starlight to purify his body. During his state of meditation, the dawn returned. Once again the night had passed. He didn't know if the energy of stars was absorbed by his body. He just knew that his skin and hair didn't change a bit and no progress was made in the purification stage. But he was used to this. However, when he opened his eyes, he felt empty in his right arm. He felt unusual. Chen Changsheng was silent for a while. He then left the library and returned to his small building and started showering. The hot water in the wooden barrel was releasing steam and it floated along with the ivies on the wall. Slowly, it was separated into countless strings of smoke. He sat in the hot water and laid against the wall of the barrel and closed his eyes. He was tired. The morning was so quiet that he felt something was missing. Just like earlier when he opened his eyes, he felt something was missing on his right arm. There was no pretty and crisp voice and no one hugged his arm dependently. Only for a few days, he was used to the presence of that young girl. Thinking about this, he felt a little embarrassed and his face was a little warm. He realized that matter how he followed his heart and calmed his mind, he couldn't completely diminish vanity and some other feelings. He placed the wet towel on his face. He didn't want his warm face to be shined by the light. Suddenly, the wall next to the barrel came crashing down and dust flew everywhere. Bricks and stones fell down from the broken wall. Chen Changsheng removed his towel and stared at the wall in surprise. Under the dust, there was a huge hole that in the wall. The dust gradually fell to the ground and Luo Luo walked in through the big hole in the wall. She turned around and saw Chen Changsheng in the wooden barrel and was extremely happy. We didn't calculate the wrong spot, it's here. She didn't say this to Chen Changsheng, she said this to her subordinates holding the construction tools behind her. For a while, behind the quiet small building, next to the old wall was filled with construction noises. Not one of the busily working people looked at the wooden barrel. It was as if they could not see the youngster in the hot water. Looking at this scene of lively construction, Chen Changsheng felt the water in the barrel was cooling rapidly and his body was cooling as well. He was so surprised that he couldn't speak a word. His mouth was open slightly. He felt this scene was crazy, but what was more crazy was that he himself was in this scene. Not for long, a brand new wooden wall appeared in the wall. The people went back into the herb garden and closed the wooden wall. The Tradition Academy was just as quiet as before. Except there was an extra wall and one more person. Now it's much more convenient to come over every day, I don't need to ride the carriage anymore. Luo Luo's hands were on her waist. She looked at the door and was satisfied. It was silent, no one answered her. She turned around and looked. She saw that Chen Changsheng was like a frozen swan. His two hands were on the wooden barrel and it was funny seeing him like this. Luo Luo said sincerely, "Master, please continue. You can disregard me." Suddenly, Chen Changsheng's expression turned extremely serious and his eyes were filled with boundless terror. He looked at the blue sky behind her and his voice shook, "Dragon." Luo Luo was surprised, she turned her head to look, but the navy sky was empty, there was no dragon. Just this moment behind her back, a watering sound was heard. She turned around and saw Chen Changsheng, who had dressed up quickly and flipped out of the barrel and ran crazily into the forest. As he was running, water was dripping from under him. It was as embarrassing as it could be. He was like a dog in the water. Or perhaps, a homeless dog. Looking at this scene, Luo Luo couldn't help but laugh. She waved and yelled, "Master, you will return." Chen Changsheng slowly disappeared into the boundary of the forest. The smile on Luo Luo's face gradually disappeared. She seemed sad and sighed, "Master, why won't you accept me?" Chen Changsheng was wet all over, his black hair wasn't tied up and there were no shoes on his feet. He felt embarrassed but he didn't dare to return to the Tradition Academy to change his clothes. An entire capital and he couldn't find a place to go. Since he was too embarrassed to meet anyone, he couldn't find people to help either. The room in the tavern outside of the Mausoleum of Knowledge was still registered, but the walk to the north of the city was way too long. Chen Changsheng didn't want the patrolling guard to arrest him for inappropriate dressing. Therefore, he could only go to the Heavenly Academy, which was closer. He successfully attracted the eyes and mocking of the Heavenly Academy students. He just acted like he didn't see or hear anything. Finally, he found the house of Tang 36 and without hesitation he kicked the door and entered. He said seriously, "Let me borrow a set of clean clothes and I owe you this time." Tang 36 saw his appearance and was at first stunned. Then he started laughing loudly. The time between his confusion and his laughter was a little long, which showed his slow reaction. But this laughter was still a little harsh in the ears of Chen Changsheng. "Rare guest. Truly a rare guest. That what happened to you? Although I never like wearing another person's clothing, this is an extremely circumstance. Therefore, please be quick." Chen Changsheng was very serious. Tang 36 knew that if he was any slower, Chen Changsheng might get angry. He held in his laughter and found a set of clean clothes and gave 2 towels along with it. "Go whip your hair and feet, don't worry, they are all new." "Thank you." As quick as humanly possible, Chen Changsheng cleaned himself up and then relaxed. He checked around the surrounding to make sure this guy was the genius that was ranked 36th on the honor roll of Green Cloud. Even in a place like the Heavenly Academy, he was able to have a small house to himself. But looking at the paper balls, leftover food and waste all over the floor and chairs, Chen Changsheng discovered that although the small house was spacious, there was nowhere for him to sit. "Sit down." Tang 36 couldn't connect with his pain. "Where?" Chen Changsheng asked sincerely. Tang 36 now remembered this guy's weird habit. He stood up unwillingly and said, "Let's go eat." As they were walking on the path of Heavenly Academy and leaving the school, Chen Changsheng once again attracted the eyes of strangers. But this time, it wasn't his embarrassing look but rather because he was walking next to Tang 36. The students of the Heavenly Academy were surprised and wondered who this youngster was and how was he able to talk with 36 who was famous for his pride and coldness. Sitting down in a nice restaurant next to the Heavenly Academy, Tang 36 suddenly realized something and wrinkled his eyebrows. He looked at Chen Changsheng and asked sincerely, "I went to the tavern once and saw the message left for you. You actually entered the Tradition Academy?" Chen Changsheng nodded and said, what are you doing recently? But he actually wanted to ask Tang 36 why he didn't visit him after knowing he entered the Tradition Academy. Chen Changsheng only had one person he knew in the capital. Although he didn't mind loneliness, he thought it was nice to enjoy company as well. But it was hard for him to ask directly because of his personality. Hearing him admit to the fact that he entered Tradition Academy, Tang 36's expression became heavy. But seeing Chen Changsheng changing the topic, Tang 36 thought he didn't want to talk about sad things and answered, "The Ivy Festival is about to start, although I'm not afraid of anyone, I need to prepare." Chen Changsheng was wondering what was the Ivy Festival. Tang 36 asked again, "So, what happened today?" "I only wanted to be the third place in the great trial and I was staying up all night to prepare." "Your goal is the first place and you were able to water fight with people. Or did you encounter trouble?" "The Tradition Academy I really can't stay there anymore." Chen Changsheng thought back to the past few days. No matter if his eyes were open or closed, showering or reading, he could always see that young girl. He was a little dejected. For him, this emotion was something hard to experience. Tang 36 thought Chen Changsheng was enduring countless mocking and cold shoulders while he was studying in the Tradition Academy and sympathized with him. He patted Chen Changsheng on the shoulder, "If you really can't do it, then leave. I can write a letter and let you study in Wenshui." Chen Changsheng sighed. Tang 36 looked at his worrying and sad expression and felt a little unhappy. He thought to himself, "You were calm and confident even when you were rejected twice by the Heavenly Academy and Star Seeker Academy, or else I wouldn't respect you. But why are you like this now? Is the Tradition Academy actually a cursed location? Drink a little and sleep." He requested 2 bowls of strong alcohol and pushed 1 bowl to Chen Changsheng. Chen Changsheng looked at the bowl and was curious, then he said honestly, "I never drank before." Tang 36 helped him uncover the seal and said, "You drank after you drink today." Chen Changsheng had things on his mind and so did Tang 36. Plus, speaking from truth, these 2 youngsters weren't that close yet and didn't know each other that well. It was only natural that they didn't have things to talk about. Therefore, they could only hold the bowls and drank silently. Drinking silently without talking makes people drunk fast. Especially for first-timers like Chen Changsheng. Of course, Tang 36's tolerance wasn't that good either. A genius like me has no time for some Ivy Festival. But those idiotic students dared to underestimate my strength. Tang 36 looked at the students outside of the restaurant wearing the uniforms of the Heavenly Academy and smiled coldly, "This time I will prove myself," and slapped their faces. Chen Changsheng held the bowl with 2 hands and his eyes were half closed. It was clear that he was drunk. "Ivy Festival. What is it? What do they have there? Food. Is there alcohol?" The capital has the Heavenly Academy, Star Seeker Academy, Academy of Priests. In total of 6 oldest and most respected schools. The power of time was represented by the ivies growing on the walls of those 6 schools, therefore these 6 academies were called the 6 ivies. Only the students of the 6 ivies were able to enter the great trial without going through the entrance exam. From this, it was easy to see the status of these 6 academies. The entrance exam of the trail trial usually began in the summer. Although the 6 ivies didn't need to participate in it, they didn't want the students to miss a chance of enhancing themselves. Therefore, after the scores of the entrance exam of the great trial were released, the 6 ivies would invite the students who passed the entrance exam with their own student to join a great festival. Since the students of the 6 ivies would also join the festival, it was more competitive than the entrance exam. It was also shown in history that the ranking obtained from this festival was similar to the final ranking of the great trial. For this reason, the festival was viewed as the basic guideline for the great trial. Of course, the ranking of the festival didn't include the southern students and the Xiuxing geniuses who wouldn't easily show their techniques. This festival is the Ivy Festival. For Tang 36's personality, he was too prideful to join the Ivy Festival. But due to his relationship with the vice principal of the Heavenly Academy and some previous mocking from his schoolmates who were also on the honor roll of Green Cloud, he decided to join. For this festival, he isolated himself in the Heavenly Academy to Xiuxing. Even after knowing Chen Chongsheng entered the Tradition Academy, he didn't have time to visit. Chen Chongsheng put down his bowl and covered his mouth to burp. He was a little embarrassed and excused himself. He then said, "I wish you luck." Since the Ivy Festival was a competition between geniuses, it naturally had nothing to do with him. This is what he thought, but he forgot that the school he attending right now was also one of the 6 Ivies. Of course, the entire world also seemed to forgot about this. Chapter 35, Lewd Thief. Useless Trash. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. After returning to the Tradition Academy, Chen Chongsheng was drunk. He narrowed his eyes and could barely walk stably. As for the Ivy Festival, he had already put it into the back of his mind and no longer cared about it. The library was dark. He wasn't there, so obviously, the Tradition Academy would be cold as usual. He walked to the side of lake. The surrounding was very quiet, only stars were floating on the clean water and the reflections of trees on the opposing shore were not so clear in the darkness. There was a clean spring wind blowing on his face. He stood on a stone next to the lake, and looked up at the stars for a really long time. He then looked towards the stars in the lake for a really long time. He closed his eyes, silently stood there for a very long time and suddenly shouted out some curse words to the lake. He always gave others a calm and silent impression and was precocious. Such venting behavior was very rare for him, but he vented out his feelings tonight. He realized that he was actually a little tired, so he decided to sit on the lawn next to the lake, lie down and doze off. The library was completely dark. He did not go there to read, to absorb starlights, or to purify. He completely fell into a daze. He did not think. Over the years of his life, he never indulged himself, and this was the first time he wasted time. After some time had elapsed, he opened his eyes and saw that he was still lying on the lawn. The grass his hands were touching had moderately cold raindrops. His cheeks were also somewhat wet and the distant sky faintly had morning light coming out. It should be around 5 o'clock, even after self-indulging when he was drunk, he still woke up promptly. The strict or even traditional daily routine and behaviors were already penetrating into his bones and became some kind of instinct which made him feel helpless. Habit was very strong, even purification could not change it. Chen Chongsheng returned to his little building and used a wet towel to carefully clean his face while he was thinking. He glimpsed at the tightly closed door on the old wall and felt somewhat hopeful. Heaven would not respond to every wish, but today, it responded. The door was opened up and the little girl jumped over the doorsill like stepping on stones to pass a brook. She hopped to him, her black ponytails swung back and forth. She looked very cute. Luo looked at him and said happily, "Lo, master, don't you feel convenient?" The little girl smiled very happily, but inside she was very nervous. She was afraid that Chen Chongsheng would run away like he had done yesterday. Chen Chongsheng did not run today. Maybe it was because he wasn't naked today, maybe it was because he was not fully awake from ebriety last night, maybe it was because he already gave up resisting the little girl's entanglement, or maybe he actually wanted to see her. Walking out of the Tradition Academy, he bought 2 bowls of dumplings and gave the one of that was not spicy to the little girl. He then walked to the library. The little girl held the bowl, followed him and was extremely surprised but happy. After breakfast, Chen Chongsheng began to read. He found what he wanted to read easily off the shelf as he was very familiar with where he had placed it. He then sat on the floor and read attentively and silently, comparing the original documentations to the 3,000 scrolls of Wei he read in the old temple in Xining. He called this method comparison study. Reading was a very boring activity and watching others read was even worse. Chen Chongsheng was quietly reading. In the beginning, Luo Luo was very interested and she attempted to read with him, but after reading a while, she realized that she could not understand a lot of the books, so she felt very bored. Thinking that waking up early was truly not a good thing, sleepiness, like the ants under the tree, came over constantly and endlessly. As time went by, it made her feel like her head became heavier and heavier. After a long time, Chen Changsheng woke up from his deep reading. He felt that his right arm was somewhat heavy, somewhat limp and numb. Suddenly, he recalled the scene he saw when he woke from meditation and purification last night. He turned around and the little girl was hanging on his arm and sleeping again, as expected. Her hand actually did not hang around to his right arm, but simply grabbed onto his sleeve lightly. She also did not actually lean on his shoulder, because she was too small, she was only able to lean on his upper arm. Though this position was not really comfortable for her, she was still having a good nap. Chen Changsheng looked at the little girl's entirely unfolded eyebrows, looked at the innocence revealed from her relaxed eyebrows and eyes and smiled. She had a good nap because she was very relaxed. The reason why she was so relaxed was because she trusted him so much. Being trusted by someone completely was a very good feeling for Chen Changsheng, especially since he was silently marching forward by himself in the capital. Suddenly, a shadow fell on the little girl's face. When normal people slept, they did not like light. But the little girl was obviously distinct. When shadow fell on her, her eyebrows frowned, her nose lightly wrinkled, and she mumbled unhappily. She would probably wake up in a moment. Chen Changsheng liked to watch the little girl sleep. Of course, he wouldn't feel so happy after being disrupted by others. Looking to the entrance of the library, he subconsciously stirred up his eyebrows. The person who appeared on the entrance was Shuang Er. For no reason, her look was extremely cold. Today Shuang Er was feeling very chaotic because the white crane had come back from the distant south and had brought the Miss's letter again. Miss was not an idiot who followed the rules for women taught in stupid books. The Zhou dynasty also had no such strange requirements that the South had. Because she knew this clearly, she did not really understand why Miss would be concerned about the shameless youngster. Even though there was an engagement, the engagement would be cancelled one day anyways, so why would Miss care about the youngster? Fine, Miss only mentioned in the letter that she wanted to know the recent things that happened with the youngster. It's not really a concern. But why would she want to know about it? Shuang Er actually knew clearly, Miss simply did not want the youngster because of the engagement, became a dust in the river, therefore she wanted her to inquire about him. She inquired about him as Miss requested. She knew that Chen Changsheng was the only student in the Tradition Academy. Moreover, based on the madam's attitude, although the youngster wouldn't have a bright future, at least he would not have any problem with security. According to Mrs. Instruction, she came specifically to the Tradition Academy to ask if he needed any help, such as money, but she never expected that she would see such an image. Who was that little girl? Why would she hang on to this kid? Was he actually reading? Although the Tradition Academy had fallen, it continued to be a place used to educate people. This kid was actually hugging with a little girl in the library. How awful. Seeing this image, Shuang Er was strangely furious. You had an engagement with Mississippi. Although this engagement definitely did not mean anything, for now, it had not been cancelled yet. Your identity is the fiancé of Mississippi, otherwise, why would Miss care about your security 10,000 miles away and ask high-class people from the palace to save your little life? Although Miss does not like you, she still helped you a lot, but now you were hugging another girl. What a pair of whores. Shuang Er was originally going to say it out loud, but upon she looking at the little girl's innocent but pretty face, she felt bad. So she stared at Chen Changsheng and yelled angrily, "Lewd thief." After saying these two words, how would she still have patience to be concerned about Chen Changsheng's safety? She simply gave a flick of her sleeves, turned around and angrily walked away. The Tradition Academy was quiet, the lawn next to the lake was green and beautiful, yet Shuang Er felt gloomy. She felt more and more unhappy as she walked. After returning to the Dongyu General's mansion, she began writing letter to Miss, describing in detail what she heard. And especially the image she saw today. Although she did not add trimmings, she simply wrote exactly what she heard and saw. The negativity of the words was very obvious. The white crane left the capital and flew towards the mountain Virgin in the distant south. At evening, when the falling sun shined on the rare flowers and grasses on the cliff, the white crane flew down the cliff. The girl took the letter, skimmed through it and remained silent for a long time. The white crane took the pen brush again, dipped with right amount of ink and delivered it into her hand at the right time. The girl held the pen brush, looked at the white paper, remained silent for so long and sighed. She used the top of the pen to rub her head. She looked at the white crane and said, "I actually don't know what to write. According to your previous descriptions that little Taoist priest shouldn't be this kind of person." The white crane could not speak, so it could not answer for her. Instead, it used her neck to touch her wrist, which indicating to her to quickly start writing. Lewd thief. Chen Chongsheng heard the word Shuang Er said before she turned around. He knew she misunderstood something, but he didn't mind and didn't bother to run out of the library to explain. Although his marriage vow with the general's mansion wasn't terminated yet, after doing so many things in the general's mansion, he believed that she was in no position to misunderstand him, much less be in the position to be angry at him. But for some reason, he himself got angry. Luo Luo woke up and rubbed her eyes. She sensed the fragrance left over in the air and asked curiously, "Master, who came before?" Chen Chongsheng said, "A maid from the Dongyu General's mansion." After hearing him mention Dongyu General's mansion, Luo Luo's expression changed. She was about to say something but suddenly stopped and glanced out of the library. Two men have walked to the library. One of them had his hands on his back and had entered the library without an invitation. He was arrogant. That person wore the teacher's uniform of the Heavenly Academy. Chen Chongsheng noticed that this person's expression was cold and harsh. His eyes were merciless when looking at Chen Chongsheng. Such a joke. That Heavenly Academy's teacher looked at Chen Chongsheng for a second and turned around. It seemed like looking at him for an extra second would dirty his eyes. The teacher looked at the person beside him and rebuked, "The Tradition Academy was in ruins, how could it be listed as one of the 6 Ivies? And this person? A trash who hasn't even reached purification, how was he permitted to enter the Ivy Festival?" Chapter 36, Thank you. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chen Chongsheng stood up, looked at the teacher from the Heavenly Academy, remaining wordless. Luo Luo was very angry, but she saw that he did not speak, so she could only remain silent as well. Since Master did not speak or suggest anything, as his student, she should not do anything on her own. The man who stood by the library said 2 very rude and seemingly meaningless sentences. But upon hearing the words, Ivy Festival, Chen Chongsheng recalled what Tang 36 had said. He understood the implications of the festival. He never realized that the Ivy Festival was related to him because he, like many others, forgot that the Tradition Academy was one of the 6 Ivies. However, it was obvious that not the entire world forgot about this fact, especially after he joined the Tradition Academy. Chen Chongsheng looked toward the middle-aged man who was wearing a robe. He was standing next to the teacher of the Heavenly Academy. Chen Chongsheng recognized the teacher. He was Officer Xian from the Department of Traditional Education. Although they had not seen each other in a long time, the officer was responsible for the rebuilding of the Tradition Academy in the recent days. Officer Xian sensed his sight and nodded back, but he looked somewhat embarrassed. He looked towards the teacher from the Heavenly Academy and said, "Before the Tradition Academy didn't have any students, so it obviously didn't have to participate. Now that it has a student, it should participate in the Ivy Festival. Both the government and the tradition already permitted its entry. Mr. Peng, please finish your work and leave." The Heavenly Academy was the most important school of the tradition in the recent years. It had a very high status and therefore, the teachers from the Heavenly Academy possessed high statuses. He was simply an officer in the Department of Traditional Education. If under different circumstances, seeing the teacher behave in such way, Officer Xin would definitely follow up. But in this case that he understood it more clearly than anyone else. The seemingly normal youngster only had hints of a very strong background, how dare would he offend the teacher? Therefore, he had to try his best to find a compromise between the two. Are you sure you want such useless trash to participate in the Ivy Festival? The teacher whose last name was Peng said coldly. Officer Xin said helplessly, this is the rule. I can't do anything about it, can't I? Rule. Everything needs rules. Then let me talk about some rules. The teacher from the Heavenly Academy laughed contemptuously and said, according to the rules in the previous years, the Ivy Festival modeled the format of the Great Trial. There were two types, civil and military. 2 students from each school each have to pick a test to take. Now, this broken school only had this trash, how will it participate? Officer Xin was wordless, recalling that the Ivy Festival actually had this rule. Before he came, he was solely focused on how to come up with a compromise between the teacher and Qin Changsheng. He had completely forgotten about this. He felt a little anxious, thinking to himself, why didn't you, Mr. Peng, mention it before? In order to participate in the Ivy Festival, at least 2 students are required. Now that they're only one trash, how do you want me to give them permission to participate? The teacher from the Heavenly Academy said expressionlessly, his voice was filled with contempt, Officer, do you really think I come here because I can't resist the pressure from the Department of the Traditional Education? No, I simply want to come and see how long the joke of the Tradition Academy will make me laugh. He stood at the door of the library, looked at the silent school which still had some broken places after the repair and sighed coldly, the Tradition Academy. Back then it had such great fame. But now, it's simply a dead graveyard. No matter how much you repair it, this is still a graveyard. The Heavenly Academy teacher's voice got colder and colder. Recently, there is a rumor in the capital saying that the Pope is going to revitalize the Tradition Academy. Not to mention how crazy this rumor is, but even if it's real, you still have to consider the voice of the elders. He turned around and looked at Qin Changsheng. There was fire burning in his eyes as he yelled, I just want to tell people, a rumor is just a rumor. The falling Tradition Academy is just a wasteland. Trash is just a trash. No one can restore this rubbish. The Tradition Academy was completely silent. Behind the building there were wild grasses that were not entirely cleaned out. A deserted feeling spreaded. Qin Changsheng looked silently at the teacher from the Heavenly Academy and suddenly took a step forward. Useless trash. Joke. Garbage land. Graveyard. These words were still flowing around the silent library. He did not know why this teacher resented the Tradition Academy and him so much, yet he knew one thing. He was a student of the Tradition Academy, the only student. He did not live here for a long time, but because he was the only student, this entire Tradition Academy was his. The flowers, grasses, trees, bricks, stones, all were his. He worked to revitalize this place, he studied here quietly, here was his fairyland, not wasteland. He did not like to get humiliated by others, and more so, he did not like it when others humiliate the Tradition Academy. He recalled the humiliation he encountered after arriving at the capital, recalled Xuan Er who had just left and decided to do something. I will participate in the Ivy Festival, he said. He looked at the teacher from the Heavenly Academy and said, I don't know why you have to have such a big resentment against me and my school, but if you want to prevent me from going to the Ivy Festival, I can tell you that you will not succeed because of your impolite attitude. The teacher from the Heavenly Academy said coldly, in order to participate in the Ivy Festival, you need 2 students, or 0.2 trashes. Even if you are dare to participate, I can tell you that you will not succeed because in the entire continent, there won't be anyone, besides an idiot like you, that is willing to go to the Tradition Academy. Officer Xin did not say anything, but he knew that the teacher's words were true, no one would dare go to the Tradition Academy. Chen Changsheng was probably placed here by someone of very high status, or he was responsible to something. There won't be another person like him. The library was very silent. Chen Changsheng looked at the black and bright floor and suddenly asked, "Do you still insist?" An immature but determined voice came up, "I insist. I can't teach you much. You already taught me a lot. As a student of the Tradition Academy, you probably will face a lot of hate from others. Master, I am very good at contempting others. You probably will have to bear a lot of humiliation. Master, no one dares to humiliate me." This conversation was over. Chen Changxing smiled, looked at the side and said, "I still don't know your name." Luo Luo's eyes were extremely bright, her left hand tightly grabbed to his sleeve. She was very worried that he would regret his decision and said, "Master, my name is Luo Hang." Chen Changxing held her left hand, then looked at the teacher from the Heavenly Academy. "You see, now we are two people." Luo Luo felt a bit shy, leaned on his right arm and repeated like a parrot, "We are two people." Officer Xian was dazed. The teacher from the Heavenly Academy became extremely angry and yelled in disbelief, "How dare you? How will such a broken place get another student? Who do you think who you are? You think just because you say she is a student here, she is." Chen Changsheng ignored him. He indicated to Luo Luo to take out a roster, a brush and ink. He wrote Luo Luo's name on the roster very seriously. Luo Luo lifted up the document and turned it towards the sun. She breathed in air and blew on the document very hard to dry it up quickly. Under the sunlight, the roster shined very clearly. There were only 2 names, but 2 names were enough. I have the roster. Anyone can be the Tradition Academy's student, as long as I write their names up. Chen Changxing pointed to the roster, looked at the Heavenly Academy teacher and said, "Even if you are the Pope, you still can't change this fact." Officer Xian quickly tried to smooth out the situation and speak soft words into the ears of the teacher of the Heavenly Academy. However, at the same time, Xian also requested him to give Chen Changsheng and Luo Luo permission to join the Ivy Festival. The teacher fell silent for a long time, and finally left a stamp on the scroll for Officer Xian. But the business was not finished yet. The teacher looked at Chen Changsheng and Luo Luo and said expressionlessly, "The students who passed the semi-trial are permitted to join the Festival of Ivies. Many of them are from different places all over the continent. Garbage like you are trying to join as well. Are you trying to put shame on the Zhou dynasty?" Chen Changsheng thought for a moment and was ready to say something. Just this moment, Luo Luo pulled on his sleeve and asked shyly, "Master, can I say something?" Chen Changxing said, "You are now a student of the Tradition Academy, of course you can." Luo Luo looked at the teacher of the Heavenly Academy and asked seriously, "But, what does it have to do with you?" The teacher of the Heavenly Academy wasn't a teacher of the Tradition Academy. How was he qualified to teach the students of the Tradition Academy? Luo Luo looked like a young girl of 11 or 12 years old. She spoke boldly and her words were naive, but her question has pointed out the problem directly. The teacher heard this and was stunned. Although he was at the brink of his anger, he didn't know how to reply. Good. 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 He was so angry that he started laughing and then yelled coldly, "I'll just see how the Tradition Academy will try to re-establish itself. When the Ivy Festival arrives and garbage like you from a ruined academy are shamed by the public and the entire world, don't blame me because I have warned you." After saying this, he left the building quickly. Officer Xian didn't leave with him. He walked into the library and explained to Chen Changsheng in a low voice. Chen Changsheng now knew that the Ivy Festival was planned by one of the 6 Ivies each year, and this year it was Heavenly Academy's turn. Since Traditional Academy didn't join the Ivy Festival for many years due to lack of students, it was gradually forgotten by everyone. But this year's situation was different. Of course, it wasn't the reason that the teacher of the Heavenly Academy was so angry and had such a bad attitude. The true reason was due to a certain rule of the Zhou dynasty. In that law, if an academy was unable to successfully recruit a student, its teaching certificate would be abolished and the school would shut down entirely. The Tradition Academy didn't recruit any students for many years, and if it still didn't obtain any new students this year, then it would silently disappear into history. But who knew? Right at the last year, the Tradition Academy got a student named Qin Chongsheng. Just because of this? Qin Chongsheng asked. Officer Xian was silent. That year when the incident occurred in the Tradition Academy, 3 of Professor Peng's seniors died here. Qin Chongsheng was silent. He thought that if he were Professor Peng, he would for sure want the Tradition Academy to be shut down and disappear forever, and his attitude towards the student who appeared out of nowhere and changed the destiny of the Tradition Academy wouldn't be too good either. He would love for the student to leave and shut down the school. But don't think about it too much. You don't have to participate in the Ivy Festival, and Professor Peng and the likes couldn't bother you either. Officer Xian comforted Qin Chongsheng and looked at Luo Luo, who was standing beside him quietly, then laughed and patted on his shoulder. You are good. Luo Luo didn't understand this comment, neither did Qin Chongsheng. Both of them was only 14 years old, and Qin Chongsheng still thought Luo Luo was a little girl of 11 or 12 years old. Qin Chongsheng looked at Luo Luo's face and hesitated. It wasn't until this moment did he notice that this little girl was really pretty. Luo Luo grabbed his sleeve and said, Master, you can't regret now. Qin Chongsheng scratched his head reluctantly and thought for a long while, finally said a word, You. 8. Luo Luo opened her wide eyes and was confused. Didn't I eat dumplings with Master in the morning? Yes. But it's noon now. Qin Chongsheng looked outside of the window and said, It's time for lunch. Luo Luo heard this and her hands came together before her and she bowed, I'll make lunch for Master. Go buy something to eat. Qin Chongsheng replied. Luo Luo asked, Dumplings? Qin Chongsheng thought for a moment and said, There is a noodle shop beside the dumpling shop on this street. It doesn't taste too bad. Also, don't add too much bean sprouts, add more noodles. Luo Luo ran out and laughed all the way, her hair was flowing in the air. Sitting on the wall, Officer Jean and Officer Li looked at each other. This is fine. I think so. After eating noodles, it was afternoon. The spring wind's fragrance made people both drunk and sleepy. Qin Chongsheng looked at Luo Luo and said, Sorry, I only knew your name today. Luo Luo smiled and didn't say anything. Take the night pearl and other things back, I really can't accept them. Master, are you regretting about this again? Of course. Not. Then. How could you decline the gifts of a student? Didn't you buy a bowl of noodles before? Luo Luo's face turned serious and she lifted her dress lightly, then slowly kneeled on the hardwood floor. Qin Chongsheng was silent for a moment. He bowed towards the direction of Xining village and then gestured toward Luo Luo. The scene of spring was bright and the lake was as calm as a mirror. Rarely, a breeze blew through and around the shelf and hair of people. Qin Chongsheng straightened his back and lifted her up. Luo Luo said, Thank you. Qin Chongsheng didn't know what to say, he thought for a while and also said, Thank you. Chapter 37, The First Lesson. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Qin Chongsheng suddenly remembered that he hadn't introduced himself. Oh yeah, my name is Qin Chongsheng. I know. Luo Luo laughed as she replied. Of course she knew that her master's name was Qin Chongsheng. Although she never suspected him, the guards who protected her in the herb garden had already obtained all the information regarding Qin Chongsheng through various ways because Lu Lu wanted to be his apprentice. She knew that he came from a small town named Xining, knew that he knew Tang 36, and knew how he got into the Tradition Academy. With all the information, she believed that Master was definitely not a commoner. Lu Lu remembered her actions just now and said a bit worriedly, Master, was what I said to the teacher from the Heavenly Academy somewhat improper? Qin Chongsheng thought about it, it was actually somewhat improper. What does it have to do this you, can be said as, just fuck off. After saying this, he laughed. Luo Luo laughed too, very happily. She thought, she is happy easily when staying with master. This was truly a very good thing. Then she remembered that the people from Dong Yu General's mansion came to visit right before the teacher from the Heavenly Academy came to visit. Why would people from the Dong Yu General's mansion come to see master? Something. Chen Chongqing did not know how to answer. He saw the little girl's curious look and asked, you know the Dong Yu General's mansion? The legendary Phoenix Nest, how can I not know? The so-called Phoenix Nest, obviously was related to Su Yu Rong's inborn talent and bloodline. Chen Chongqing asked, you met Su Yu Rong personally? I really want to meet her personally. Luo Luo said unfortunately, when I came to the capital, she already went to the south, so I had no chance to meet her. Chen Chongqing remembered Tang 36's evaluation of Su Yu Rong and was convinced, Luo Luo, I know you are very strong, but don't try to compare yourself to her. We don't really have to be better than anyone. As long as we are improving, then we are strong. Luo Luo knew he misunderstood something and laughed, she is the reincarnation of a phoenix, absolutely unique. Even my family members appreciate her a lot. When I was little, they always used her to motivate me, but I had never thought of comparing me and her. I heard that she's really nice, besides she's somewhat cold, yet she's much better than the 7 rulings in the south. Actually I just want to meet her and become her friend, master, do you think that's okay? Chen Chongqing remained silent for a while, I don't really have a good relationship with her. After hearing this, Luo Luo was a little surprised, then she thought of something, master truly likes to lie. Chen Chongqing felt puzzled and asked, how did I lie? Master always said he was a commoner. I am a commoner. Luo Luo covered her mouth and laughed, said, how can a commoner have a bad relationship with her? Chen Chongqing was wordless because she had her point. If he's truly a commoner, then no way he could have any relationship with Su Yu Rong who was always on the top of the sky. If they did not have any relationship, then how could their relationship be bad? After Luo Luo saw Chen Chongqing's expression, she stopped laughing and said seriously, Master, starting from today, I don't like her anymore and I don't want to be her friend anymore. Chen Chongqing felt dazed and asked, why? As a matter of course, Luo Luo said, because Master doesn't have a good relationship with her, then she definitely is not a good person. Chen Chongqing sighed, said, do you have any common sense? Master is my teacher, obviously I have to listen to everything you say. Isn't that common sense? Chen Chongqing did not know how to reply and suggest her to sit down. He then delivered his hand to her. Luo Luo wanted to be his apprentice no matter what because of her problem with Xiu Xing. Every Xiu Xing method had to have a corresponding qi operating method. If one completely understood it, one could express the true force of her Xiu Xing method. Her problem was that she had no way to operate the qi inside her body according to the book. Yet that night when the demon elite attempts to assassinate her, Chen Chongqing used a few words to prove that he could solve this problem. For her there was at least a possibility. When Chen Chongqing put her name on the roster of the Tradition Academy, he had to be responsible for her Xiu Xing. He knew approximately what her problem was, so the first lesson he is giving her, obviously needed to start from this aspect. In the beginning he had to know the qi situation in her body. The spring wind flew in, lightly touched the pages and skirt hem. Chen Chongqing and Luo Luo sat on the black and bright floor facing each other. He closed up his eyes, calmed down his mind, extended his right arm, lifted his right hand, and slowly fell on her wrist. His action was very casual, yet very accurate. His index finger and middle finger was stuck together, like a sword with forged edge, precisely fell on her pulse, yet when his fingers really fell down, his action was rather very soft, like the falling leaves in the fall, wouldn't scare the ground under the tree at all. Luo Luo's eyes opened up widely, looking at his fingers placed on her wrist. She was very surprised, since childhood, she had seen so many doctors, so she knew that this seemingly common diagnosis was actually professionally done. Was Master also a great doctor? When she was surprised about these things, Chen Changsheng was also very surprised because from his diagnosis, he clearly sensed that, the little girl's pulse was so strong. His pulse was as clear as war drum. The problem was, the drum beat was so dense, how could the pulses be so fast? His finger, just like the raindrop bounced back from the drum, withdrew immediately. He looked up and stared at her eyes, looked at the clean and calm eyes, to make sure that it's because she was too excited and therefore had a super fast heartbeat. After thinking for a while, he put his 2 fingers on her wrist again, but he did not expect the heartbeat he sensed was still so fast. Luo Luo's heart beat faster than twice a regular human. If a regular human was keeping such fast heartbeat frequency, his face would definitely be red, sweat a lot and pass out. The person might even die from the explosion of blood vessel. But, Luo Luo did not have any such symptom. She looked very normal, even her blood vessel appeared to be very calm and steady. Why? Chen Changsheng did not take back his fingers, attentively observing her pulse. He frowned more and more, until after a very long time, he saw that her heartbeat rate did not decrease as time passed, but had rather became faster and faster. He looked up at Luo Luo's face again, seeing that the little girl had more sweats, breathed more frequently, he knew that this time she's really nervous. Luo Luo indeed was very nervous, she never thought that Master's first action on the first lesson, was actually to help her diagnose. Until Chen Changsheng's fingers had fell on her wrist, she remembered that her pulse was very different from common people. What could she do? Chen Changsheng took back his fingers, looked at her and remained silent for a very long time before he asked, was your pulse always like this? Luo Luo looked down, lightly replied, like a child who did something wrong, it was like this since I was born. Chen Changsheng continued to remain silent, as if he were thinking a very complicated problem. He faintly guessed Luo Luo's identity. Any human could not live for so long with such fast heartbeat frequency, of course no one could live to Luo Luo's age. There was only one explanation, Luo Luo was not a human. The spring wind continued to fly in, lightly touched the pages and little girl's skirt hem and also her wet hair. The library was completely silent. Luo Luo looked down, looked very pitiful. Chen Changsheng looked at her, wanted to ask something, yet did not know how to open the conversation. Luo Luo suddenly looked up, looked at him who wished to speak but stopped on a second thought, and said bravely, Master, if you ask, I will answer everything. Chen Changsheng looked at her, suddenly felt her bravery and thought for a while, then I won't ask. Luo Luo opened up her eyes, looked at him surprisingly, why, Master? Aren't you curious? Curiosity was the itch that every intelligent being could not stop. It was the biggest temptation. For example, she's very curious now, why wouldn't Chen Changsheng ask about her identity? She already said, as long as he asks, she would tell everything completely to him. Curiosity, sometimes aren't good. Ah. Chen Changsheng sighed and said, am I your teacher? Luo Luo was puzzled, said, of course you are, Master. Chen Changsheng used his hand to lightly touch her head, laughed and said, teacher needs to have a teacher's appearance. If the truth was too surprising, your identity is too scary, then how will we interact in the future? How do I protect a teacher's respect? Luo Luo had never thought about this reason. She dazed a bit and asked carefully, Master, aren't you scared? Chen Changsheng said, this is not scary at all. It's just that I had never encountered it before, so I'm not used to it. Luo Luo felt very happy after hearing this, used her head to touch his palm, like a cute little animal, said, Master is the best. Probably because she thought Chen Changsheng, from inside to outside, every single hair was good. Luo Luo's firm trust on him, at this moment, enlarged unimaginably, like morning sunlight bursting out. Although he didn't ask, she still wanted to say something. Master, The amount of qi in my body is not little, she said. Chen Changsheng thought about the previous pulse and knew that it was true. Her soul was extremely strong. If she had such an identity, then the amount of qi in her body obviously wouldn't be little. It should be at least much more than people's in her age. But I don't know how to use them. Luo Luo explained, of course my family has Xiao Xing method, yet the best method in my family are only suitable for males. Even if my bloodline is awakening, I won't be able to reach the top. The most I can get to is star fusing stage, I can never reach saint stage. Chen Changsheng felt a little wordless, thinking that if one could get into star fusing, then he would be one of the limited elites in the continent, yet his little girl student was actually not satisfied. From this point, he could imagine how high her criteria was, or how amazing her identity was. If I am not the strongest, then in the future I can't inherit my dad's power. I then will have to marry his successor. Luo Luo looked at him said grimly, I don't want to marry something. So I want to learn humans' Xiao Xing method, see if there's way to break through such limit. Chen Changsheng thought a little, then said, no problem, we will definitely become the strongest teacher and pupil on the continent. Luo Luo opened up her eyes, although she had an almost blind trust on Chen Changsheng, yet hearing this sentence, she still dared not to believe in it. Chen Changsheng thought about his own issue, looked at the direction of the Ling Yan pavilion in the royal palace, had a mixed feeling. The things he had to do, in everyone's eyes, were simply wishful thinking, yet he must think that way, and fight for it, because fate did not give him a second way. Dare to think. Before your dream comes true, never limit yourself beforehand. Never find any excuses for yourself, or reasons to fail, only so will we have the possibility to make the seemingly distant dream reality. This is my first lesson for you. Chapter 38, To mentor means to point and direct. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Goal, desire, and persistence were important and appropriate materials to talk about in the first lesson. But things that could be cleared up in 2 or 3 sentences were obviously not lengthy enough for an entire lesson. Chen Changsheng needed to teach some things that were useful. He picked out an index about the human body structure and veins that was officially recognized by the Department of Education of the tradition. He skipped through the previous simple introductions and jumped straight to the last page, which contained a colored page of the human body. He checked the red and green lines in the picture and started to compare them to Luo Luo's actual situation. The lines represented the complicated veins of the human circulatory system. Just from an estimation, there were more than a few dozens of veins, but with a more closer look, this amount would double or even triple in number. However, from Luo Luo's perspective, there definitely were not this many veins in her body. These were 2 completely different vein structures. One was complicated but fragile and the other one was simple yet enduring. The humans had one vein structure and the Yao race had another. The difference in vein structures lead the 2 different species into 2 distinct paths. This difference in vein structures lead the 2 different species into 2 distinctive paths. There was no way of knowing which path led to greater success. This became a topic of debate between the races, which is still ongoing. Chen Changsheng wasn't moved by the uniqueness of another life, he was just moved by the Creator's miraculous ways. He also knew that if 2 lives wanted to cross the middle ground and learn the other side's shushing technique, it would be an extremely difficult task. If Luo Luo's race could easily learn the human's way of Xiao Xing, then she wouldn't be learning the wind and rain sword of Mountain Zhong right now, but rather the principal sword technique of Mountain Li that she gave Chen Changsheng the day before yesterday. The principal sword technique of Mountain Li was one of the strongest techniques that humans had. This meant that it was extremely difficult for those of her race to learn and master. Because of this, Lulu had to step down a notch and learn the weaker ones. The human's way of Xiao Xing combines physical techniques with the inner qi. Take wind and rain sword of Mountain Zhong for example, only knowing the sword techniques wouldn't be enough. People also need to control their qi in a certain way to fully show the true power of this sword technique. The problem for Luo Luo was that her body never contained the veins of a human, so she could not continue to show Xing. Although she understood the words in the book and knew that she needed to control her qi to circle around her veins, the problem was that she didn't have the proper veins in her body. Even if her spirit was powerful, how could she circle her qi around veins that she didn't have? That night, when I was following the master's instructions and tried to activate my qi, I noticed that I could actually control the wind and rain sword like other humans. Was that a stimulation or was that my way of combining inner qi and sword technique? Luo Luo asked sincerely. She was very studious right now. Chen Changsheng thought about her question but didn't reply to it immediately. He turned around and walked out of the library and picked out a broken tree branch in the forest around the lake. He then took out his short sword and peeled away the skin of the branch. Now the branch was a white thin stick, and Chen Changsheng didn't forget to dull the tips of the stick using the stones lying around the lake. He walked back to the library and said, "If you don't want to, speak." Luo Luo looked at the thin wooden stick in his hand and opened her eyes widely. Would she get beaten right after becoming his apprentice? Does her master believe in the big stick policy? But it wasn't easy becoming his apprentice. How could she say that she doesn't want to speak? Luo Luo nodded her head heavily. Chen Changsheng raised the thin wooden stick in his hand, pointed at a spot on her belly, and said, "Run your qi up to here." This point was the so-called sea of qi in humans. He was not sure if Luo Luo had it or not. It's inconvenient for him to ask about questions that intruded on privacy, but based on Luo Luo's emotion, there shouldn't be any problems. After a while, he asked, "What do you feel?" Luo Luo was focused and concentrated on what she felt from the location that the thin wood stick pointed. "I feel a little hot. Fire of yang can show itself when running through certain veins. If you have this feeling, then I believe this vein here should have the same functions as the Rao vein." Chen Changsheng took notes as he explained to her. That night, he only said one sentence and helped Luo Luo successfully activate her qi and truly use the wind and rain sword of Mountain Zhong for the first time. But that was the only move, and it was kind of lucky that they even succeeded. The thing he needed to accomplish now was to break the limit of human body in vein system and create an entire new way to Xiuxing. Of course, it was incredibly difficult. This wasn't something that could done in one day and night. If he hadn't memorized the entire scroll of the way when he was young, if he hadn't excelled in the area of medicine due to his own sickness, if his veins were actually ordinary instead of abnormal, there wouldn't even be a possibility. After finishing taking notes, he picked up his head and thought for a moment. He poked lightly on a certain spot on Luo Luo's neck through her shirt with the stick. "Careful and slow. What do you feel?" "A bit gentle." "Okay. What about here?" The thin wooden stick landed on Luo Luo's body. It pointed and directed, "This means to mentor." Chen Changsheng got his response and took notes, then he continued. Time passed quickly as they talked and as Chen Changsheng mentored Luo Luo. As the dusk arrived, Chen Changsheng's arms were a bit sore. He put down the wooden stick and glanced out of the window. He only saw the yellow roof and red wall, then suddenly laughed. After using half a day, he found a certain possibility. He found a possible quick path, the quick path in Luo Luo's body. "Try." He took back his glancing eyes from the setting sun of the capital and looked at Luo Luo. He drew out the short sword from his waist and handed it to her. Luo Luo accepted the weapon and took a deep breath. Her eyes suddenly became extremely bright and then they were closed. She was silent for a long time. Just as the setting sun was devoured by the city wall, she opened her eyes and yelled lightly. This yelling was crispy and sharp, it contained no trace of disruption and was clear as the spring rain, or perhaps the spring wind. Following this scream, she raised her short sword upwards from her waist with her hands. It was as if a flower has blossomed and grew on cloud 9. There were countless sword shadows, like rain. The sword's might was unstoppable, like wind. This was wind and rain. This was the wind and rain sword. Without the veins of humans it was impossible to learn the way of using qi in the wind and rain sword of Mountain Zhong. But the sword she previously used was the wind and rain sword. This meant that the way she controlled her qi mimicked the human's way of controlling qi perfectly. The wind and rain gradually stopped, the setting sun was gone and night slowly arrived. The old garden was quiet. Nothing but silence filled the library. Luo Luo's hand that was holding the short sword was shaking. She stared at Chen Chongsheng and her voice was shaking too. "Master, you are truly extraordinary." She was shocked. She felt that her master was a god from heaven. Or else how could he teach her so many things in such a short period of time? She thought he was a god. Chen Chongsheng placed the thin wooden stick in front of him and laughed happily while looking at her. These few days, no, more precisely, these past years he had always thought about how could one show Xing under the condition of broken veins. Previously, he never show Xinged and therefore all of his hypotheses couldn't be tested. But now, although he still didn't have a trace of qi, he has a female student. That female student was excellent and could perfectly test all of his ideas. On top of that, they used half a day to test his hypothesis, which came out to be correct. Luo Luo said, "Master, thank you for mentoring me." Chen Chongsheng said, "Thank you too." The dusk wasn't burning but warm, just like the stove fire of the Wotan shop. Chapter 39, From the Herb Garden to the Tradition Academy. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Luo Luo returned to the herb garden and her people instantly knew that she was in a good mood because she hopped all the way from the school to the garden. Her quick steps were like stepping on clouds and she was humming a small tune. Her clear voice was like nightingale and her eyebrows were flying. Officer Jean and Officer Li looked at each other and quickly followed up. They obviously knew the reason for their princess's happy mood, but they couldn't see what happened in the library, therefore they were a bit confused. Why was she so happy about having a master? What was the youngster in the Tradition Academy so good at? Luo Luo simply cleaned and washed herself up and changed into a clean dress. She took the iced tea from a maid's hands and took a sip, then walked to the living room. She looked at her two guards and said, "Ask what you need to ask because I need to sleep early today. I will wake up early tomorrow morning for school and I don't want to be late." Officer Jean thought to himself, when did our princess become so focused on learning? Of course he didn't say this out loud. It's fine to be a little late. Does that youngster dare to harm you, princess? He is my master, stop calling him a youngster over and over again. From now on that you guys will call him Sir Chen. Luo Luo thought about her master's serious attitude towards Xiu Xing and learning and his strict passion towards time. She looked at the two officers and said pitifully, "If I am late for the early classes, my teacher will get mad. I don't want to be whipped tomorrow." Officer Jean was stunned after hearing this. He couldn't believe what his own ears had heard. That youngster dared to whip his princess. If this was known by the people of the Red River of 800 miles, then the entire capital would be burnt down. He was ready to complain harshly about Chen Chongsheng, but he felt Officer Li faintly pulled his sleeves. Then he noticed that his princess wasn't unhappy about her teacher and she acted out her pitiful appearance. She was actually excited and joyful. Officer Jean was completely lost. He couldn't understand what happened these few days. He didn't understand how that youngster named Chen Chongsheng. Okay, that's Sir Chen. What quality did he possess besides bravery and sympathy? What kind of skill did he have that the princess respected him for? My teacher is no ordinary person. Luo Luo obviously knew what her people were thinking. She saw the confused look on Officer Jean and the worrying expression on Officer Li before she explained. Officer Jean didn't speak, but Officer Li couldn't help but whisper, "He didn't even reach purification. Could he be even more ordinary?" Luo Luo said, "Do you guys think that an ordinary person that couldn't reach purification could solve a problem that even my father couldn't?" Officer Jean hesitated and said, "Perhaps. It's all luck. Luo Luo thought back to her experience from the evening and said proudly, no, what my teacher doesn't need the most is luck. Bingo. Gee, that's what he needs the most now. LMAO, Officer Li asked confusingly, then that if this Sir Chen is no ordinary person, then why did he enter the Tradition Academy? What is he hiding? Silently learning and Xiao Xing, not showing himself nor advertising his names. He only wanted to be the unknown fish in the pond and wait patiently. Wait for the day when the storm arrives and that fish will jump over the gate of dragon and transform into a true dragon. He will glance over the entire continent and his name will be heard all over the world. Luo Luo's eyes turned brighter and her voice louder. Teacher's idea is excellent. Officer Jean couldn't help but laugh. He thought to himself, this is the real world and these fantasies have no place in it. Although the princess seemed all grown up, she was actually still a kid. Next morning, Luo Luo woke up on time, of course. If she followed her regular schedule, the sleepy girl definitely couldn't get up. Her maids followed her instructions and started ringing the bell from 4:30 in the morning. She would wake up even if she didn't want to. Luo Luo put a shirt on and rubbed her eyes while opening the door. She whispered angrily, it's too loud. The maids forcefully suppressed their fear and insecurity and continued ringing the bell. Their faces were already pale and after hearing their princess getting angry, they kneeled quickly in fear of punishment. I was just saying. Luo Luo yawned and told them to get up, you guys shouldn't be punished but rather rewarded. Go to Officer Li later and get some money for reward just like we said last night, if you guys can wake me up before 5 o'clock you will be rewarded. If I didn't wake up, then your salaries this month will be gone. The maids looked at each other and knew their princess wasn't actually angry. They stood up and quickly moved all sorts of tools and started clearing the princess up. Then a servant got dozens of dresses and asked which one would the princess like to wear. Luo Luo picked out the simplest and cleanest dress before she casually ate a bowl of gruel and a piece of meat cake. Afterward she opened the lunch box on the table and checked carefully, then nodded her head in approval. She picked it up and started walking to the wall. Pushing open that new wooden wall, she arrived at the Tradition Academy from the herb garden. There was no wooden barrel or a showering youngster on the other side of the wall. The previous experience left a deep scar in Chen Chongqing's memory and the first he did after dinner was to push the wooden barrel into the small building. At the same time he didn't forget to lock the small building up and add curtains to the windows of the bathroom. The Tradition Academy was silently going through changes because Chen Chongqing didn't live here alone anymore. The Tradition Academy now has 2 students. Reading and Xiao Xing. This was still the main theme of Tradition Academy. Besides showering outdoor and singing in the bathroom, Chen Chongqing felt that the biggest change in his life was his diet, which had improved tremendously. Starting from the second day he admitted Luo Luo as his student, he began eating the breakfast, lunch, and dinner that Lu brought from the herb garden. He was extremely satisfied by the food brought from the herb garden. The variety of the dishes, combination of vegetable and meat, and nutrition and taste all far surpassed his imagination. Back in the old temple of Xining village, his senior was the cook. Although there was no problem with the nutrition, it didn't really taste good. He wasn't only satisfied by the food, but also more satisfied by the actions of Luo Luo. From its core these food were her heart and her present. Luo Luo was close to him. She wanted to stay with him every moment and every second. When he didn't pay attention, the young girl would wrap herself around his arm and smell him, just like a cute kitten. If it wasn't for Chen Chongqing's strong denial, she wouldn't even return to the herb garden to sleep. But Chen Chongqing was just a youngster 14 years old. He wasn't used to Luo Luo's respect and dependence. Although he still thought she was only around 10 years old, he was still a little embarrassed being this close to a girl. However, the feelings were nice, so nice that he was willing to endure it. But there was still no breakthrough in his Xiaoxing. Many days have passed and he continued to absorb starlight and purify his body. Yet there wasn't any change in his body. Even as determined as he was, he started to doubt himself. At least he felt his luck was not good. He didn't know that Luo Luo told her people that he was the type of person that didn't need luck. Luo Luo's luck was extremely good. If there is such thing as being blessed by heaven, her blessing was unmatched. Starting from the night she met Chen Chongsheng to the day she recognized him as master, dozens of days had passed. Spring hasn't ended yet, but Chen Chongsheng has already helped her find 3 paths of controlling qi. She has already learned 17 techniques of the wind and rain sword of Mountain Zhong. As the summer approached, the semi-trial of the Great Trial has ended. The streets and avenue of the capital were filled with people. Countless students from all over the world were either filled with extreme joy or despair. They either need liquor to celebrate or forget about everything. The taverns were filled to the maximum, and before night arrived, the famous brothels had already put up a color lamp. Due to the recent Xiu Xing problems, Chen Chongsheng's mood was a little down. He knew that being stressed wasn't a good thing and he needed to relax. Therefore he walked out of the Tradition Academy and took out half a day to look at some scene. But the interesting thing, or rather something that leaves people speechless, was that he didn't go to Li Palace to look at ivies, he didn't go to the Nai Bridge to count stones, but he brought Luo Luo to the end of 100 Blossom Street and sat down to look at the people passing by. Luo Luo always listened to him with no objection. No matter what decisions he made, Luo Luo would accept them and believe they were correct. Even if his actions were a little strange, there must be hidden meaning behind his actions. Today, she was finally unhappy. Teacher. She sat at the stone stairs and looked at the green moss on the opening of the well. She kicked a piece of small leaf in front of her and wanted to complain about the boredom, but she didn't say anything. She thought that since they rarely left the school, shouldn't they walk a little further? Shopping with the teacher must be really interesting. What happened? Chen Chongsheng held 2 popsicles and said, "You don't want to eat it. If I eat 2 of these I will have a bad stomach." Luo Luo thought that her teacher still cared deeply about her and started being happy again. She took the popsicles from his hands and sat with him. They looked at the crowd on the street and stared into space. She licked the popsicle and asked, "Why is there so many people on the street?" Chen Chongsheng bit a small portion of the popsicle off and said unclearly, "When I was buying the popsicles earlier, I overheard people say that the semi-trial of the Great Trial has ended." Luo Luo widened her eyes, "Ah." Chen Chongsheng turned his head and looked at her, "What happened? Is it too cold?" Luo Luo looked at him and said unsurely, "I think we might have forgot something." Chen Chongsheng started to think back and his eyebrows started to wrinkle. Then suddenly he relaxed. "I remember now. I need to represent the Tradition Academy to attend the Ivy Festival. Yes, the semi-trial of the Great Trial has ended and the summer has arrived. The Ivy Festival was about to start." Luo Luo asked, "Should we go?" Chen Chongsheng thought for a while and said, "We should go." Luo Luo asked, "But no one has announced anything to us." Chen Chongsheng said, "If the Department of Education forgot about it, then we don't need to go." Luo Luo licked the popsicle joyfully and said, "Sure. It's up to you, teacher."